Well, hello, friends and family out there in YouTube land. I'm Robert Hamm with RobertHammPhotography.com. You can catch me over on Twitter at RobHammPhoto, and you can even find me on both Facebook and YouTube at /RobertHammPhotography. Yeah, I know, go figure, big craziness there. Listen, today is another check out my camera, and I wanted to show you my workhorse today. It's my Fuji XT-1, and the XT2s come out, the X Pro 2s come out, of course. I am definitely quite interested in both of those cameras, but here is my Fuji XT-1. This is my absolute workhorse camera. As you're looking at it right now is one of the configurations that I use for this camera, and you'll notice the battery grip. This is the XF55 to 200 right there that's on it. I also use a couple different flash that are sync on here. Another lens that I use, this isn't the only other lens that I use, but I also use the 18 to 55 f2.8 to 4. Really nice lens right there. And I also use the Rokinon 85 f1.4, which on this camera has an equivalent 35 millimeter focal length of 130, about 128, 130 millimeters as a portrait lens. It opens up to f1.4. You'll notice I haven't really rattled off a whole bunch of additional Fuji lenses. I just have two Fuji lenses and the one Rokinon lens right there. And I've got to tell you, if you go check out my work, then you'll be able to see what type of images this camera with this lens combination produces. And they're really quite awe-inspiring. Now, I'm not going to talk up my work. I believe I have beautiful photography. Clients book me, and I'm a regional photographer. I'm not quite worldwide or even nationwide, but I do go to the surrounding states to photograph weddings. People call me up, and you know, it's really impressive the type of images that I'm able to produce with this piece of kit, and I like that. So I'm talking about why I enjoy using these particular two lenses on this camera. First of all, 16 megapixel shooter. I can go into Photoshop if I need to and resize something. 16 megapixels, I find at around 240 pixels per inch. I can very easily print images out this up to 16 by 20, at least you know, nice and reliably. I do 13 by 19 up to 13 by 19 here in my own home office. I've got a couple different printers set up right like that, and I truly enjoy it. They produce very nice images. The quality that the camera produces overall is just beautiful. Now, I shoot in RAW plus JPEG. I generally use the JPEGs unless there's a case where I need the RAW. So I shoot in RAW plus JPEG in order to have two formats: an original, unedited, you know, a RAW file, and then what I was seeing at the time in the JPEG. Originally, when I first came to Fuji, I was shooting in RAW only. I'd only shoot RAW. I didn't really care about the JPEGs. I'd only shoot RAW, and I would use those RAW images to convert. So I found that when I switched over to Fuji, after I started shooting RAW and JPEG, and maybe I would have found this on other systems, I'm just telling you about my process. When I started shooting this camera in RAW and JPEG, I realized lots of times the JPEGs, as I was setting it in the camera, was very close to my end result. And that going through the time and process of working with the RAW files would produce the same result, but it would take longer. So it shortened my workflow to be able to work more closely with an end result. Now, I've been photographing weddings professionally for 5 years, and before that, you know, a lot of times I spent a lot of time in Lightroom fixing things like correcting exposure and skin tones and white balance. I spent a lot of time doing that. But today, that's not how my workflow was spent, and that's because of the experience that I've gained. So an experienced photographer is going to be able to start with a better input in the first place. Because you're starting with a better input, specifically we're talking about input from the camera to Lightroom, because you're starting with a better input into your final workflow, you're able to get a better, more consistent output, or at least I am. That's my philosophy. So I shoot in both RAW and JPEG. In case I screwed something up really bad, I can go to RAW to recover. But generally speaking, I use the JPEGs to transfer out, at least right now, probably 80% of the time. And the reason that that's important is because it still produces a nice, high quality 10 megapixel JPEG or 10 megabyte, 810 megabyte JPEG from the 32 megabyte RAW file that it creates, 8 or 10 megabyte JPEG that I'm able to save, and then, you know, we can have those printed out pretty much whatever we want in sizes. We think about lenses, right? You think, oh, I got to get that f2.8 lens. Well, there's a lot that goes into creating a nice, beautiful, shallow depth of field. And this lens right here can do so because it's telephoto. We all know that telephoto lenses compress images, so you're able to stand a little further away from someone, zoom in real close, and get a nice bokeh in the background. Fuji didn't make this lens like any other lens. I think it's 14 or 15 elements in like 3 groups. The lens is metal. It's solid. It feels good. It's heavy. And it's just a blazing piece of glass. I got a polarizer on the front of it right now. And this zoom lens works great for me indoors and outdoors. Now, yeah, Fuji does produce some additional high-quality 2.8 f2.8 lenses, but for me, I haven't seen the necessity to go out and purchase that just yet. Now, would I like to? Sure. I've got a couple of different cameras that I use, but I haven't been lacking in the ability to produce a nice shallow depth of field. Of course, the lower the f number, you know, the wider that you can make your aperture, the more depth of field that you're going to produce, period. So if I wanted more, I know that there's opportunities to get more. But as a production photographer for weddings and family portraiture, this lens works beautifully. Another lens that I use is my f2.8 to f4, 18 to 55. So I can get an 18 millimeter, almost undistorted image at f2.8 right here that's nice and sharp all the way around, and that's at 18 millimeters. So there's my super wide angle right there, equivalent to 24 millimeters on a I guess it's not super wide, but it's a nice wide angle equivalent to 24 on a full frame camera. And I can also zoom if I need to 55 millimeters, and at that I get f4. So I got 55 at f4 and I got 18 at f2.8. I consider this an f4 lens all the way through because that's its maximum aperture. But at the longest telephoto, so I just consider it more like an f4 lens. But once again, great color rendition, a little to almost zero chromatic. Actually, I've never had to correct for chromatic aberration on this lens or the other lens. It's just not something that I have to worry about. Beautiful lens, looks great, and I enjoy it. The coupling of these two lenses right here with this camera work extremely well because it's an extraordinarily tactile feel. You've got your knobs on the top to set everything. You've got your apertures on the lens. Even though they're unmarked, they are clicked apertures because it's an aperture. All of this is electronic. So the difference is when I'm using my 85 f1.4, that's all physical. It's all manual. On this camera, the 85 1.4 works great because of this extra large viewfinder and a nice refresh rate of around 60 frames a second. I think it might be like 56 or 54. It's definitely enough to use very well, including in low light. So those are the lenses that I use, and that makes this camera a really modular system for me. When I need to go small, I can take the battery grip off, although I hardly ever do. This camera is a working camera. I use it because it makes my life easy when I'm working on a wedding. I can see everything I need right here, right away. I hardly ever use exposure compensation because I'm generally always in manual, but it makes it so it feels good, it's easy for me to get behind, and I can shoot very well. The cameras that I pick up for my enjoyment, really, are the X Pro 1. Now, I've been shooting weddings with the X Pro 1 because it's an excellent camera. In low light, it's not as good as the XT-1, not even as good as the X100S that I use, but it is still a beautiful camera. But this right here, when it's time to shoot a wedding for something paid, this is what I go to. I use this, and I use my X100S right here, and I'll use my X Pro 1 as an additional camera. I use them interchangeably. It just depends on what they are. I don't favor one camera over the other except for the X Pro 1. This one is always going with me when it's time to shoot a wedding or something. I really enjoy this camera. I like it quite a bit. It feels good in the hand. I had an excellent experience with Fuji when I needed some repairs done on the camera, specifically to the door that wouldn't close, and that was compromising my weather sealing. Fuji took care of it. Had it back in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, somewhere in there. I think it was closer to 3 weeks, actually. And so it's just fun to use. It's very intuitive, but it's also not a camera you're going to just jump into. Sure, you've got automatic settings, but if you're using the camera for its automatic settings, then you're looking at the wrong camera. If you're out there, here's my photographic plea. If you're watching this video, if you're watching me, and you've got a camera that has settings other than auto, and it's not just a point and shoot, get out of auto. Do yourself a favor. Figure out ISO, figure out shutter speed, figure out aperture, figure out how they work together, and start making images instead of just taking pictures. being quite honest. When the computer's doing all the thinking for you inside of the camera, you're just a driver. Not even really a driver. You're more like you're just a guy pointing. If you're just pointing, then you're not able to make images. And I want you to be able to make images. That's why I do these videos. I want you to make images. So I'm begging you, please, put your camera on something other than auto and start making the choices. And it's okay if you get it wrong, because it's photography. And if you're shooting digital, it doesn't even cost you anything after you've already bought it. But if you don't make the initial attempts, you'll never grow as a photographer. So get out there, get off auto, get onto manual, some kind of manual, even if it's a aperture priority to start with, and start figuring out what these things do. There's lots of videos out there that can help you. Guys, I'm Robert Hamm with RobertHammPhotography.com. You can find me over on Twitter at RobHammPhoto. You can find me on both Facebook and YouTube at /Robert Hamm Photography. Don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed this video. Smash it twice, the thumbs down button. Smash that one twice if you did not like this video. And don't forget to subscribe. As always, keep shooting, my friends.